the power to save you. Ah, the Lord Almighty, there is nothing like your love, Lord, your love. You have given me it all, given me it all.
Amen. Thank you again, Jason. If you take your Bibles, that hopefully you have, we're going to turn to Daniel chapter 3 this morning. And by the way, I really like those doors open because what a beautiful view while I'm preaching. I like that. We'll have to do that more often. So, now don't be distracted by that, okay? Daniel chapter 3 this morning, and we are continuing in our series, Stories, focusing on some of the great passages from the Old Testament. But last week we read from Luke chapter 1 to show how the New Testament looks back at the Old. This morning we're back on familiar ground, looking back in the Old Testament. And over the next few weeks, what I'm going to try to do, this may be good news for some of you or bad news for others. If it's bad news, then just go home and pray. But I'm going to extend the series a little beyond what I intended. I intended to finish. Oh, thank you, kid. I see one hand. I intended to kind of finish up, early August, and I think I'm going to extend it to early September because there's a number of passages that I want to help you to see how they connect to the New Testament. And I could have broken it up into another volume, but I thought, well, let's just go ahead and get as much as we can. And that will kind of conclude. So right about the time that we're transitioning out of summer, this is a summer series, okay? We're going to go into a fall series, which will probably be in the book of James. So that's just to give you a little bit of a heads up. But what I'm going to do over the next few weeks is focus in stories more on children's stories. And these are not aimed specifically at children, but they are some of the stories that you heard growing up and maybe you read in your Big Picture Bible if you grew up with a Big Picture Bible. I still have one of those. I sometimes teach the kids from it, but the binding's kind of falling apart, so I'm going to get it out every now and then. But it's got those dramatic pictures and that kind of thing. And maybe you heard these in children's church. If you had the benefit of going to a church where the Bible was actually taught, children's churches it is here. If you were not raised in the church, you may have heard these stories in other places. Nevertheless, they're pretty well known. So that's what we're going to kind of focus on in the next few weeks. We're beginning this sort of sub-series here in the book of Daniel. This happens to be one of the books that many of us heard dramatic stories of survival from, and courage and heroism and those kinds of things. But that's not really what the book of Daniel is about. The book of Daniel, it's not really about dare to be a Daniel, okay? Although that's good if you want dare to be a Daniel. But it is about several things that I'm going to mention just briefly. The sovereignty of God, the care of God for His people, the person and work of Messiah, and eschatology, that is the return of Messiah, the end of earthly regimes, and the ushering in of the kingdom in its final state. Now, because we're not studying through the entire book of Daniel, we're not going to look at each of those in detail, but we are going to look this week at Daniel, and then we're going to continue next week to see where the story of the king goes. I will recap next week for those that are not here, so just bear with me, and then I want you to see what happens with King Nebuchadnezzar, and we'll do that next week. But let's read Daniel 3. I titled this message, A Fool's Gold. We're going to see what that means a little bit later. I'm going to read the entire, I was going to say the entire book of Daniel. That would be quite a sermon. The entire chapter 3. It's a bit of a long chapter, but follow along with me. It's kind of important that we make sure we understand what's going on here. So let's read Daniel chapter 3. Follow along with me in your Bible. This is God's holy word. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, and the height of which was 60 cubits, and its width 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent word to assemble the satraps, prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces to come up to the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces were assembled for the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "To you the command is given, O peoples, nations and men of every language, that at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. Therefore, at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. For this reason, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and brought charges against the Jews. They responded and said to Nebuchadnezzar the king, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, and bagpipe, and all kinds of music is to fall down and worship the golden image. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have disregarded you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and anger, gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you're ready, at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, and bagpipe, and all kinds of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, very well. But if you do not worship, you will be immediately cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. And what God is there who can deliver you out of my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we're not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image you set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with wrath, and his facial expression was altered toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He answered by giving orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. He commanded certain valiant warriors who were in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in order to cast them into the furnace of blazing fire. Then these men were tied up in their trousers, their coats, their caps, and their other clothes, and were cast into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. For this reason, because the king's command was urgent, and the furnace had been extremely hot, the flame of the fire slew those men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire, still tied up. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astounded and stood up in haste. He said to his high officials, Was it not 3 men we cast into the midst of the fire? They replied to the king, Certainly, O king. He said, Look, I see 4 men loosed and walking about in the midst of the fire without harm, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near the door of the furnace of blazing fire. He responded and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out, you servants of the Most High God, and come here. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the midst of the fire. The satraps, the prefects, the governors, the king's high officials gathered around and saw in regard to these men that the fire had no effect on the bodies of these men, nor was the hair of their heads singed, nor were their trousers damaged, nor had the smell of fire even come upon them. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angels and delivered his servants who put their trust in him, violated the king's command, and yielded up their bodies so as to not serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree that any people, nation, or tongue that speaks anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses reduced to a rubbish heap, inasmuch as there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way. Then the king caused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to prosper in the province of Babylon. Amen. This is the word of the living God. Now, whether I remember as a child being deathly afraid of incineration. There was a number of times in my adult life when I actually caught myself on fire. It's easy to back into a candle. You would be amazed at just how easy it is. Back in the days when I smoked cigarettes, this is probably a message from the Lord anyway. I caught my clothes on fire one evening while I was outside trying to light up a cancer stick. And so it goes. Because of this, I have sort of a general revulsion, or I should say a general fear of being burned alive. When I was a small boy, I remember sitting in a parking lot one summer evening. I was probably only about 5, 6 years old. And I remember sitting with my great aunt. She didn't drive, so it must have been somebody else's car. But a neighbor came over in the darkness and she said, "Did you hear about such and such?" She said she set her hair on fire. She was smoking a cigarette and sprayed hairspray on her, in that direction, and set her hair on fire. Now, I don't know what happened to that lady. I never heard if she was severely injured. But that just traumatized me hearing that story. And I have thought about that incident and have had an image in my mind of what that must have been like probably every year since I heard the story. And to this day, I'm a little bit nervous around fire. I don't sit too close to the fireplace, generally speaking. You'll notice this if you know me. I don't mind getting up there for a couple minutes, but then I get away from there. I have great respect for fire. Now, let me say this. Whether you are for or against capital punishment, okay, incinerating people alive is not something that would probably play well in America. We would consider that cruel, inhumane, and primitive. And yet that is exactly what Nebuchadnezzar does in this context. It probably was no more popular in that day than it would be today, but this is how he's going to intimidate and control his subjects. He's going to do so through that primitive fear that we have of being burned alive. How did we get to this point in Daniel's account? Well, over a period of time, Daniel began to impress King Nebuchadnezzar with his devotion, his wisdom, his political counsel. As a result, he was promoted to rule over the province of Babylon. That's a theme in the Bible, by the way, where God promotes his own within the ranks of others. His friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were promoted at Daniel's request. He had a dream in chapter 2, which as Nebuchadnezzar did, which Daniel interpreted as being about the king's rule, and he calls him in chapter 2, verse 38, the head of gold. And so perhaps with that dream in mind, Nebuchadnezzar decides to erect a giant statue, a likeness of himself, and the demands that everyone worship it. This is bizarre. If you came to church one Sunday and there was a statue of Todd Wells up there in the front yard, or Jason Sparks, I would expect you to run and say, "My time with redeeming value is over." It was it was very likely controversial. You'll notice he puts the statue on the plain of Dura, probably politically safe, so he wouldn't get too much criticism. But why does he do this? Probably an attempt at testing the loyalty of those who are in positions of political power around him, those who report to the king. In recent days there's been shakeups in Washington around political loyalties. Who's loyal to the president? Who's not loyal to the president? And that has become a big controversy. Well, that's not anything new. There's been loyalty tests even going back to the days of Israel. Loyalty tests. We're going to test whether or not you are politically loyal. This is actually, however, even a religious test. It's used to show that the king is the one in power. And if you don't worship what the king says to worship, you will be thrown into the fiery furnace. You can't really force people to worship. Now you might think, wouldn't it be nice if we had a Christian government that forced everybody to be Christian? No, it would not. Because first of all, it would be feigned Christianity. We already have plenty of fake and feigned Christianity going on without the government helping to encourage that, right? We don't need any more of that. But you can't really force worship. You can simply force some level of conformity. You can't force conversion, you can force conformity, see? Compulsory worship is not real worship. The king simply is trying to make people do as he says. He wants to show that he is in charge and he can demand obedience. This is a test to see even if the Jews will abandon their faith, you see. Will they act against their faith? Will they betray their faith? Because the other option, you understand, is death. So the question here becomes, Are you going to be faithful to God, or are you going to give in to the king under pressure? That's really always the question for believers, isn't it? Am I going to give in to sin? Am I going to give in to pressure? Am I going to give in to Satan's schemes? Or am I going to be above that and be faithful to the Lord? Not perfectly, although perfection is something certainly to aim for, but is this going to be the pattern of my life? That I fight sin and I seek to rise above that out of faithfulness to the Lord? Understand, in terms of history here, God's people are in a state of defeat. They're in a state of exile. They're in a state of captivity. They are subject to pagan authorities. And the irony is, it was Gentile idols that led them into Gentile captivity. That's what sin does. We think sin is a friend, and sin leads us into a captivity that we did not anticipate. But even though God permitted Nebuchadnezzar to have the victory at this time, it's clear in a sequence of dreams that his kingdom has an expiration date. Persia, Neo-Persia, Greece, Rome are going to follow him after his rule. And Daniel was confronted, on the other hand, with the reality that there would be a lengthy period of captivity for God's people. There would be a time of Gentile world dominion. There would be the destruction of Jerusalem at the hands of Rome. But in the midst of all this bad news, Daniel stands as an example of devotion to the Lord. You'll notice the king's orders. What does he order here? He orders music, a band. This is probably some kind of mind control thing, I'm guessing. When I was growing up in the 1980s, hard rock, heavy metal. I didn't listen to any of that, of course. I listened to only hymns. But some of my friends. We were into that because the message was parental rebellion against authorities, and the music was reinforcing that you can act against authority, you can be autonomous, you can be a rebel. And before all that, of course, there was a few years before my time, there was the countercultural music of the late 1960s, Woodstock, popular anthems for hippies to live by. If you listen to the audio of the late Jim Jones, which was in November 1978, 79, somewhere around there, and you can listen to this on YouTube. You can listen to the audio of the last hour or so that he was with his followers and was encouraging them to take of the cyanide-laced cocktail because he knew that the authorities were encroaching on the whole thing. And it's a very intense audio, very intense. But I noticed that when I listened to this a few years ago, that in the background, you can hear this sort of doomy, monotonous kind of music. And I thought, what is that all about? And I bet it was to set the mood and to sort of manipulate his followers into listening strictly to his voice. Music here is intended in this text to act like Pavlov's dog. And when you hear the music, you respond with obedience. You bow. And if you decline, well, you are toast. Literally. This decree is a reversal of the plan of God. The plan of God is always to take the nations and bring them to Himself. This plan is to take the nations and bring them to idols. That's what Satan does. He tries to pervert and reverse the plans of God. Now, the Act 2 in this, if you're breaking it up into Acts, okay, Act 2 begins at verse 8. This is where the whistleblowing Chaldeans come in to report the ones who did not submit. Don't you hate people like this? The new school year is underway. Every generation has certain kids that, that want to try to ruin things for everybody else. We had a kid in my junior high class who would remind the teachers, you didn't collect the homework for the day. That's the Chaldeans. My brother, his name is Kerry, and I can remember my mom would cut hair. She's a beautician. She would cut hair. And one of the neighbor kids that went to junior high or high school with me came up and would get her hair cut, and she would say things like, Mrs. Wells, I didn't know you let Carrie smoke cigarettes at school. Mrs. Wells, I didn't know you let Carrie play hooky and go out and drink beer. Mrs. Wells, I didn't know, and on and on and on, trying to, that's the Chaldean approach, you see. Here comes the Chaldeans. We're telling, verse 9, they say, "Oh, King, live forever." There may be some flattery in there, but that's really the customary way that you would greet the king. But may I note that no earthly king lives forever. Many kings in that day had a vaunted sense of their perpetuity. They not only did not acknowledge that their power came from God, but they had no sense of their expiration date, that it was going to be over for them. In verse 12, they inform him that there are certain Jews who disregarded him. I agree with those that say this is probably sort of a veiled form of anti-Semitism that's going on here. Certain Jews. We might say today there's certain Muslims. There's certain African Americans. There's certain people, and we need to point out to you, King, that it's those Hebrew people. Don't you remember your hatred towards them? This still exists. I had an older man just this past week on social media that was telling me God made one race, and that was the white people. And I said, really? That's interesting. And he went on to say, the Jews are all just Edomites. God has no plan for them. God doesn't love them. God hates them, etc. And I just responded. I said, well, that's interesting. I said, you'll answer to God for that opinion when you approach him at the bar of judgment. And he said, oh, I know you. He said, you're one of those people raised in a Talmudic school. In other words, a school that teaches you to respect and love the Jewish people. That kind of person, you can say, is irrelevant. It's a bitter, cantankerous, elderly man who's sitting in his home with his keyboard and so forth. But do you realize that hatred against the Messianic seed is rooted in the hatred that Satan has for the Son of God? And so the acts of malice throughout history against Jews are not incidental. They are a deliberate response of the enemy of Messiah to God's plan to promote and glorify himself by laying down his life for sinners. The Chaldeans were probably just, however, as motivated by hatred for the fact that these friends had been promoted over them, in a sense. We live in a world of resentment and jealousy. When you get promoted over somebody else, we'll find out whether or not they're actually your friend. In verse 13, the king flies into a rage. That's not surprising, of course. But here's what is surprising. He allows for a second chance. He asks them, he gathers them together. He says, is it true that you did not obey and bow down to the image? But then you'll notice he doesn't even wait for an answer. It's like he doesn't want it to be true. He says, boys, how about we try this again and prove to the king that those annoying whistleblowing Chaldeans that you really are loyal to me. I suspect he didn't want the Chaldeans to be able to say, see, we told you so. So you should have listened to us. You shouldn't have done this. You shouldn't have brought in these outsiders, king. And so basically the king says, maybe you were in the restroom or you were texting your friend Daniel and you just didn't hear the music, so let's strike up a band, let's try to get from the top. But notice the response, verse 16. We do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. Wow. That is like Jesus when he was before the Pilate and Herod. Remember how Jesus answered? My authority comes from God. It is as you say. I don't need to answer you unless I choose to, essentially. Here they are. And you've never read this before. You would tense up in fear, I would think, if you're paying attention. Because their answer is to the king. You understand these are three young Hebrew men in a kingdom run by a Gentile with an enormous ego, and a Gentile with an enormous sense of megalomania, and an enormous furnace to boot. And they refuse to back down. The king would not have been accustomed to being spoken to so brazenly. What these boys are basically saying is, King, we answer to a greater authority than you. If God wants to deliver us, He can. If He doesn't, that's no excuse for disobedience. By the way, let me say this. Don't use your circumstances as an excuse to be disobedient to God. Okay? I know we all fall into this sometimes. I fall into this. I'm sure we sometimes think, gosh, I've had such a bad week. Well, people should understand why I'm so cranky. My husband should understand why I'm so impatient right now. Yes, I shouldn't have said that to him or her, but look at my week, look at my life, look at my circumstances. Yes, I skipped out on church for 8 weeks, but look at how terrible things are. And God's not giving me a break. I'd go to His house and worship and listen to Pastor Jason and his exhortations to sing if God would just give me a break. Your hard circumstances are not an excuse to live in disobedience to God. They don't do this, and their circumstances were far harder than almost anything we would face. They are firm in their resolution to not bow down. When Nebuchadnezzar asks, "What God is there who can deliver you out of my hands?" Boy, is that not egotism? The response basically is, "Our God, that's who." He quite literally thinks he is more powerful than the gods. If there is a God out there, he is inferior to my power. I've had people say to me in evangelism, I've had people say to me, you know, if your God is like the God of the Bible, I refuse to bow down to him. He's not worthy of me. And I just step back, because I don't know what's going to happen next. But I know what's going to happen when they stand before God for judgment. Now look at verses 19 to 30. They tell us that Nebuchadnezzar was filled with wrath. He had some of his valiant warriors try to take the three to the slaughter. And they do, but they're consumed by fire in the process. It's a hard job. I don't know what they were paid per hour, but not enough. The king had demanded the fire be heated up 7 times hotter than it was. It's not necessarily a mathematical equation, but what it means is make it as hot as you possibly can. Make certain they are going to die. And he probably wanted to intimidate anyone who might be looking and saying, you know what, maybe I'll resist next time too. Verses 24 to 25, he realizes that not only the three are still alive, but a fourth man is present. He is called a son of the gods. Some take this fourth man to be an angel. Others do not. A common view, and I know this from BBS because I heard Jerry say it in the room when he was teaching, and I agree with him, and I wanted to yell out amen, but I didn't, because I didn't want to interrupt the lesson. But that this is a pre-incarnate Jesus. A Christophany, in other words. That's the view I would be inclined to side. It's not a matter of orthodoxy here, okay? It's interpreted in different ways. A friend of mine said it doesn't really matter who it is, it's just that the point is that God is present with them in the fire. That's a fair point. But if you're looking for pre-incarnate incidents of Jesus, what I mean by that, young people, is okay, Christ eternally exists in the Trinity. Amen? Okay? But Jesus took on human flesh. It's not a different being. It's Christ came down, took on human flesh. But in the Old Testament, sprinkled in different places, I'm not saying there's a lot of them, but sprinkled in different places, there are what appear to be manifestations of Christ prior to his coming in the Old Testament. We call these Christophanies. And if you say that word to Cindy next week and tell her what it means, maybe she'll give you a present or something. Okay? I'll set it up. But this is before his incarnation. But we don't have to be too dogmatic about this, but I will say this, in the Greek, the word that Nebuchadnezzar uses is a word for deity. He didn't have a Trinitarian theology, but nevertheless, this may be the intention of the book of Daniel. After all, it is a messianic book. But in any case, there's a bona fide miracle here, right? As rational Christians, we believe in a rational world with scientific explanations for things, and we should. We don't have to vilify science. I hear sometimes Christians say, you know, I'm a Christian, science is bad, scientists are bad. God hasn't really set up that kind of antipathy. We don't have to vilify science and act like, just because we disagree sometimes with the scientists, that it's all deviant or something. God gave us science, and he gave us scientists, and even non-Christian scientists can contribute to our knowledge of the universe. But that doesn't mean, however, that we must suspend our belief in the miraculous and the supernatural. No. We take the Scripture at face value, and this event is part of the historical record of Israel's past. And the king, well, he's not a Christian, of course. He's not a fundamentalist. He's not even a creationist. But a pagan king with pagan deities and false religions realizes that what has happened here is a miracle of God. And he acts in God's providence as a witness to this. In the same way that King Darius will later be a witness to Daniel's God when Daniel emerges from the lion's den unscathed. The men are safe. The officials confirm the men have not even been singed. And Nebuchadnezzar, for his part, not only recognizes the God of Israel, he even signs into law legislation making it a serious offense to speak anything offensive against God. I'm sure the ACLU would be all over him if you were allowed today. And the king causes, very politically incorrect, I can imagine some of the liberals in his government were saying, what in the world's happened to our king? And he causes them to prosper, it says, whatever that means. Daniel doesn't really explain. Now his motives in this last act, why did he do this? speculation. Did he get caught up in the moment and seeing a miracle? You know how people will come back from a conference sometimes and say, boy, I went to that conference, it was great, and now I'm going to sell my house and move off to the mission field and be a missionary in Lithuania. And, a couple weeks later they say, okay, I'll come back down to earth. How about I just work someplace, local? It happens. And I don't mean this to disparage you, but I know, growing up sometimes in the youth group, there would be a very warm Sunday evening and that kind of thing, and the youth would get very stirred, and they'd say, boy, I'm going to give my life to Christ, I'm going to serve Christ, and, a year later they're pregnant out of wedlock, and it's just a mess. That doesn't always happen. But sometimes emotionalism is just simply what it is, and there's not a substance behind it. Was that the case with Nebuchadnezzar? We don't know. I suspect he did it because he feared God might throw him in the fire furnace. And I think he was trying to appease the gods, which is what kings do. And I think he recognized that God's power is supreme, and he's trying to appease God for having so offended him. I want you to understand, Nebuchadnezzar is different from some of the other kings in the Scriptures, because most of them, even when faced with the retributive justice of God, they don't repent, they don't confess their sins, they don't make any movement towards seeking God's mercy. But Nebuchadnezzar, chapter to chapter to chapter, is making movements towards faith. Listen, sometimes people that we pray for and we witness to, they don't automatically convert, but they incrementally move towards Christ. That's still God's grace. That's still God doing that. Okay? But that's the way sometimes it goes. There's no denouncement of pagan deities. Not yet. Not yet. Okay? He doesn't say, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this statue. He is Mr. Gorbachev, so it could be him. But he does acknowledge and promote religious freedom for the Hebrews, and even gives them additional protection against anyone who would slander God of Israel. That's bold. That's progressive for a pagan Babylonian king. And in doing so, he shows us that he realizes the power of God is something to be reckoned with. God's people were in captivity, church, at the hands of pagans, but that's not because the pagan gods were more powerful than Israel's God. They were in captivity courtesy of God. He sent them there. And in His time, He will free them just as He did in Exodus. The Pharaoh learned the hard way that when God says, let my people go, He's not kidding. And your puny little kingdom, temporal as it is, does not give you any bargaining power with the God of the universe. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Somebody pronounced his name Abednego. Okay? Maybe I've been pronouncing it wrong all these years, but nevertheless, they gained a lot of respect from this king for simply being faithful to God, with the courage to be unfaithful to the king. I thought about this morning over coffee. James 4 says, friendship with the world is enmity with God. You cannot compromise with the pagans around you, the pagan world system around you, and still be a friend of God. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are friends of God and willing to be unfaithful to the king. Now, a lot of Christians can take this text and run with it and say, you know what, I think this is a call for me not to pay my taxes. I think this is a call for me to revolt against the government. I think this is a call for me to reenact the Boston Tea Party. It's none of that. Instead, what it is a reminder that when the furnace of persecution and affliction are upon you, you trust a sovereign God to deliver you, and even if He doesn't, He is still worthy of your monogamous faith. I want to challenge you this morning with this passage. Is your faith, and me, challenging you too, is our faith the kind of faith that's willing to suffer Christ's cause? I mean, really. Does the mercy of God mean enough to you that you will do everything within your power to resist the devil when he attempts to cajole you into sin or to cause you to doubt your monogamous commitment to the Lord Jesus Christ? We can't really be, however, courageous men and women and boys and girls, I recognize a few of you are in here, if we don't first do this. We must first entrust ourselves to God's sovereign protection. These three young men, who incidentally carried names that were not their original names. Their original names were not what we have here. They were taken into captivity after Babylon's conquest of Judah, and their names were changed to be a parody of their Hebrew identity. For example, Belteshazzar is what Daniel was called while in Babylon. That means Baal protects your life. It was a mockery, you see. But You can change their names, you can change their identity, but you don't change who they are. The country band Alabama saying, you can take me out of the country, miles from where I want to be. You can take me out of the country, but you can't take the country out of me. The king took them out of Judah. He didn't take the Judah out of them. They were still servants of God. Martin Luther wrote, like goods and kindreds go, this mortal life also. See, when you are connected to Jesus Christ, you are willing to stand and you are willing to demonstrate costly love. In this passage, or rather in the let me reference this, in Hebrews 10, we have an example of this. When the Christians were imprisoned for their faith, and some of them had a difficult choice. You can go underground, those that haven't been in prison, go underground and stay safe, or visit your brothers and sisters in prison and risk your lives and property. And Scripture says they chose the way of love and accepted the cost. That's the essence of being a Christian. You understand that? It's not trying to get God to accept you. You're already accepted in Christ when you put your faith in Him. We don't make these stands to get accepted by God or to have our sins paid for. The sins were already paid in full. Well, Melody and I were up a couple days ago at Highlands Baptist Camp way up in Martinsville. By the way, if you drive up there, you would think that you have driven to Canada. It's just a very long drive, as I realized, or as she said, you're just getting old. But nevertheless, we decided, we got wonderful accommodations at Highlands, and can't say enough about them. And their hospitality, complimentary stay for pastors, that's great. But we decided, do we want to go out and splurge? We have a little bit of money, say, go out and splurge, go to Chili's or something. No, he said, no, let's go to Pizza Hut and pick up a pizza. I said, that's a great idea. I haven't had Pizza Hut in years. So we go in there, and she goes in and pays for it. And then she says, why don't we go here to Kroger, Kroger Martinsville. It sounds like a great date night. I said, fine, and she said, we'll go pick up the pizza afterwards. So we get back to the parking lot, and she says, all right, go in and get the pizza. And I said, do I need money? And she says, no, it's already paid for. And I go in there and I said, I want to pick up a pizza for Melanie Wells. And he says, $10.80. And I said, no, what is that? I said, hang on just a second. I said, I think my wife paid for this. I said, oh, wait just a minute. And he says, oh, yeah, you're right, it's paid for. Here you go, have a great evening. And I go out to the car and I said, you realize you set me up to almost pay an extra $10.80 for that pizza. Now Jesus is not asking us to pay it again. He already paid it in full. But why do we live this way? Why do we live like the example here in Scripture? Because we accept that Jesus is more valuable than this earthly life. And serving Him may cost us dearly, but He is infinitely worth the cost. See? These Hebrews did not say with confidence, I thought this is interesting. Maybe you do too, maybe you don't. But they don't say, hey, no worries. God's got our back. God will deliver us. If we just muster up enough of our faith, we can be the head, not the tail. We claim our deliverance from captivity. In Jesus' name, amen. No, they say, maybe God will deliver us, maybe He won't, but we'll entrust ourselves to Him nevertheless. Now, not only must we entrust ourselves to a sovereign God, but second point, we must secondly remind ourselves that we're in a battle. We're in a battle. Some Christians don't think that way. But this is a battle we're in as Christians. And I don't mean a war against the government or America or the culture around us. I mean we're in a global battle with spiritual darkness and the schemes of Satan. This is why evangelism is so important and why it's so needed and why most of us, including myself, could probably spend more time preparing to do it. It's part of the battle. The 4 young men, including Daniel, were not functioning as evangelists in the sense that they went to the king and asked to share the Roman road with him, but in the sense that they showed confidence in the power of God, devotion to Yahweh. They were being evangelists in that setting. We must remind ourselves that part of the battle is to be prepared for hostility and persecution, which is exactly what they were experiencing. Third point, expect a glorious finish. This is the last point. I don't know how confident these 3 young men were that they would get out of harm's way. But they knew God would do something glorious in this trial because they knew the character and nature of God. When we're in the proverbial furnace of affliction, we may not be able to see what God is doing behind the scenes. But we will see it, maybe in heaven, what God was doing all along. Trust in God's sovereignty. Remember you're in a battle. Expect a glorious finish, a glorious outcome that to all that have suffered here. That's the whole point of Hebrews 10, church. It is to say that there are many who have suffered before you, but they remain faithful, and you can too. You can too. But the king, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more next time, but he really discovered, and I want to come back to my original point, his statue was fool's gold. It's fool's gold. You know what fool's gold is? It's gold that looks like real gold, but it's actually pyrite. It's not real gold. Now the king used real gold on the statue, but it was foolishness because the reign of the king won't last. 9 stories of idolatry and madness is all it amounted to. See, he may have used real gold on it or overlaid with gold more technically, but it was really fool's gold in essence because he thought, or rather having that hit of gold dream, must have planted the thought in his mind that caused him to get drunk on his own narcissism and pride, and he discovered that all that glitters is not gold, and that he was really a golden fool. Now the New Testament gives us a king who is not insecure, who's not narcissistic, who's not oppressive, and who won't try to trip you up into false religion. Jesus Christ. He doesn't need a statue. He is sufficient unto himself. And his reign is not temporary. It is final, and it is forever. And when the music plays in glory, church, it will be, when we sing his praises, it will be that we do so because we want to. Not begrudgingly, not like so many in that crowd undoubtedly did, just feigning it all, just doing what they could to get out of the situation. But when we're before the throne of Jesus, there will be no place we would rather be. He is our gold. He is worth far more than gold. These boys told the king, even if God doesn't deliver us, we're not going to bow down. And I thought about the Puritans who were nonconformists, who said, we're not going to bow down to the Church of England. We're not going to abandon our faith for the sake of safety. We're not going to conform to this church for reasons we won't get into this morning. We will stand with Christ. As a Christian, you must have a nonconformist in you. You must. You must be ready and willing to not conform to the world around you that will try to lure you into sin. You must remember that though Jesus paid it all our debt, it's canceled, it's taken care of, but the question still remains, how are you going to live in regards to it? Young people, because I said this is and I aim this at children a little bit, listen, how you live day to day says everything about your commitment to Jesus Christ. If you live, not picking on you, but this is the issue in our home. Of course, it's the issue in every home. But if you live disrespectful to parental authority, if you live with a callousness, if you don't have a direction in your life moving towards Christ, it may be that you're bowing down to something else. How will we as adults live with regards to this truth? Maybe someday someone can rat us out. Maybe someone can be the Chaldean in our lives who says to someone else, he does not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you have set up. Let them tattle. Let them rat us out. I hope the accusation is always true of you and me. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for Jesus Christ. We could not be devoted to our Lord were it not for sovereign grace. Of course, Lord. We're aware of how weak and dependent we are. But Father, would you give us a resolve and a commitment deep inside that we say, no matter what comes against us, no matter what furnace we get thrown into, we stand with Jesus resolved to obey and let the world accuse. Let the world accuse. Let Satan accuse. He is called, after all, the accuser of the brethren. And it is no wonder that there are Chaldeans in history and Chaldeans today that will falsely accuse or will actually accuse, and the accusation is true. He worships the Lord. Yes, let that accusation be true, oh God. We stand with Christ. In Jesus' name, amen. Would you respond this morning as we sing? And as Jason said outside, he said, "May we sing today like we've never sung before." I was a little bit distracted this morning as we were singing. I was thinking about my notes, and I was unfocused, and I was thinking, maybe I should change this, maybe I should do that. And I don't know that I really sung like I've never sung before. I don't think I did. But here's an opportunity for you to, as we just go out with a coda before communion and offering, let's sing like we never have before unto the Lord. Would you respond?
Please stand.